Hello. Welcome to Business 113, Introduction to Business. Today we're going to be talking about business ethics and social responsibility. So before we get into the idea of business ethics, we start with the concept of trust. And in many professions, the entire concept, the undergirding, the supports are all based on trusting someone. So we have here a Gallup poll from December 2017, and it tells us, based on their survey, who the most trusted people are and the least trusted. So starting at the left, we have our least trusted professionals. This is your political lobbyists. These are the folks who will go and talk to the congressmen and women and try and sway them, usually in exchange for campaign contributions. And obviously, as court cases like the Citizens United, which allowed corporations to donate unfettered amounts of money, their influence has risen, which undermines democracy, which of course is why so many people don't trust them. Not surprisingly, next, car salespeople. Not necessarily the guy you would see at Honda, but, the guy who's at, Joe's motor lot. And the cars look like they're going to die before they leave the lot. Members of Congress, which is pretty hilarious. Advertising professionals, which is not surprising. Business executives, and lawyers. So, when we look at the people that really have not earned our trust, these are people who are pretty much running the country. Now, over here on the right, we have our most trusted professionals. Your nurses, military members, school teachers, medical doctors, pharmacists, and police officers. These folks are the ones that people truly trust. And again, what we're seeing here is this interesting dichotomy between the people who serve our communities and the people who run our communities. It is evident that the general public believes that there is an ongoing, long-standing pattern of deceptive behavior by officials at a large number of companies and the government. So, trustworthy companies are better at attracting and keeping customers, talented employees, and capital. Those tainted by questionable ethics suffer from dwindling customer bases, employee turnover, and investor mistrust. The situation that's happened over the past year with the Papa John's founder, who's made a few comments that were less than trustworthy about racism and his own responsibility for comments, has really caused the company to suffer a great deal. And as a consequence, they've now had to launch a new marketing campaign to put a face on the people who own the Papa John's stores. The guy who runs Papa John's that was ousted, and he's doing his own stunts. But what we're seeing here is we saw a company that had such a huge, huge portion of the pizza share in this country, or delivery pizza, who really just self-imploded through some of his own dumb comments, but has consequently affected the lives of everyone who owns one of his franchises. What can individuals, organizations, and government agencies do to foster an environment of ethical and socially responsible behavior in business? And what is ethical and socially responsible behavior? So we're looking over here on the right to this triangle, kind of a modified Maslow. You need respect. You need trust. You need that better business experience and better customer relationship. And underscoring all of these is being honest, transparent, proactive, humble, and equitable. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is equal, but it's equitable, meaning that it's fair. So let's talk about the concept of ethics, because we need to understand the implied meaning as well as the um, expressed meaning. So expressively, ethics helps us know right from wrong, especially when a situation is very complex. Now, the implicit problem here is that, should you steal the last cookie that your mom wants or should you leave it? Well, that's a pretty black and white decision. If you love your mom, you're going to leave her the cookie. And if you don't, then you need to be a better kid. Anywho, the point I'm making is that, ethics are easy in simple decisions. Ethics are much harder in very complex situations. And acting ethically in a business means more than just simply obeying applicable laws and regulations. It means being honest, doing no harm, competing fairly, and declining to put your own interests above those of your company, its owners, and its workers. So in a sense, what we're looking at here is a idea that expressly works against our inner natures to, take what's ours and to do what's best for us. And, those of us who do try to lead fairly ethical lives, we know we falter in a way that we have to do better. And that's always our inclination is, can we do better? So, the long and the short of it is, ethics are how you figure out the right choice from the wrong choice. So, what is considered good business ethics? Most lists of ethical organizational activities include the following criteria. 1. Treating employees, customers, investors, and the public fairly. 2. Making fairness a top priority. Number 3. Holding every member personally accountable for his or her actions. Number 4. Communicating core values and principles to all members. And number 5. Demanding and rewarding integrity from all members in all situations. So, for anybody who's worked in a business, you're going to see that this is not fantasy land, but the reality is usually much different. And the thing is it's not something to just discount, because in your experience this hasn't been what you've seen. It's something to aspire to, because the truly ethical companies out there are successful and have led the way. Does that mean that unethical companies are not successful? No, but they're doing it the wrong way. So some of the companies you may have heard of known for ethical behavior, and this is from Forbes magazine, which publishes a list of the most ethical companies in the world. And these companies make the list every year since it was established. So our friendly neighborhood duck, Aflac, Deere and Company, they make farming equipment. General Electric, one of the largest companies in the world. International Paper, PepsiCo, Starbucks, Texas Instruments, UPS, and Xerox. So, for some people, they want to do business with other ethical companies. And it's good to know that these lists exist so that you can, in fact, find those companies that'll make you feel good about using their services. So then we have some unethical companies. Employees are usually the first to realize that their employers aren't as ethical as they should be. And it's because they consistently feel uneasy about the work they do. They object to the way they're being treated. They're uncomfortable about the way coworkers are treated. And they question the appropriateness of management directives and policies. So, a lot of times you get this gut feeling when you're in a working environment that something's not right. And you can't put your finger on it necessarily, but it just doesn't feel right. And in those circumstances, that's your intuition or your gut telling you that there's larger problems at this company. And it's not just because they denied you a sick day or a vacation day. This is an ongoing pattern of treatment and situations that companies really get called on the carpet for eventually. So, several years ago, Apple had to finally address the issues of the work environment Chinese employees who manufactured iPhones were enduring after a rash of employee suicides. And you don't want your folks killing themselves because of their work. You know, that was the underlying concern, is when you have so many of your own employees committing suicide, what is it that is making them feel this way? You know, is the environment so toxic that, their mental illness takes them to that deepest, darkest level of despair? So, and, just in case you're wondering, here are some of the least ethical companies out there. This comes from the Swiss research firm Covalence, and they use 45 criteria that include labor standards, waste management, and human rights records. And based on these data points, the following companies are considered some of the least ethical. Monsanto. They've actually changed part of their business to another name because, yeah, things aren't going great for them in terms of how they're treating farmers. So one of the things that has happened is, so Monsanto creates genetically engineered seeds and pesticides. And one of the things that happens is, like, let's say that Farmer John buys the Monsanto seed, plants it in his farm. They get the crops, birds land. They eat some of the seed. They eat some of the crop. They fly away and poop in the neighboring yard or neighboring farm. Well, Monsanto, when it was going around checking these neighboring farms, and if they found the genetically engineered seed in other farms, they were suing these farmers. And the farmers are like, "Hello, do you not understand how nature works?" So, they've really gone far asunder. And now it's been recently alluded that they may or may not be responsible for the honeybee die-off with one of their pesticides. Halliburton, which, for those of you who are old enough to remember the Iraq War, Part 2, at the time, George W. Bush's vice president was the man who had previously been the CEO of Halliburton, Dick Cheney. And when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, Halliburton got billions and billions and billions of dollars in no-bid contracts, meaning they didn't even have to be competitive. So, it's one of those, they made a ton of money, but the optics were really bad. Then we have Chevron, which has been accused of tax evasion and environmental damage. Philip Morris, the cigarette manufacturer, is still trying to appeal litigation that proves it hid the fact that smoking is dangerous. They used to use children in their advertisements. So, it is one of these situations where Philip Morris, as a market share in the United States, is relatively high, but the number of smokers has dropped precipitously, and so they focus now on other markets. And, a lot of these other countries don't have laws yet that are restricting how cigarettes are sold, which is why they've gone to these other markets. So, some of the countries in South America, I think Peru, they passed a law against any smoking outside. So, they're trying to do what they can to combat the advertising juggernaut of the Philip Morris Company. Then we have Total SA. And this is a oil company out of France, and they just use some slave labor in Myanmar to build a pipeline. So again, when we're talking about least ethical, we're really going least ethical. These folks are just not cool about their stuff at all. It's not about whether or not they're, supporting one community or another. So, an ethical dilemma is a morally problematic situation in which there is more than one right way to act. So, you may have a decision that you have to make about, a ethical question, but it's not black and white. It's very, very much shades of gray because you can. It's like those, when you take a multiple choice test and you see these questions and you're like, okay, I can make a case for every answer I am provided in this multiple choice. These are people who love their essay questions like myself. So again, it's for those of us who like to overthink, we can come up with 100 different solutions, at least half of which are fairly decent. So to determine the best way to act, there's a multi-step process which helps solve the dilemma, theoretically. It doesn't solve your obsessive thinking, though. Number 1, define the problem. What is the problem? What is the essence of the problem? Number 2, identify possible solutions. This is where you're brainstorming. You throw everything up against the wall, and then you determine the effect of each solution on the stakeholders. And remember, the stakeholders are the company shareholders, the employees, the consumers, the community at large. Number 4, establish criteria for determining the most appropriate action. And this is where we go back to our mission statement, our company values, and see what is aligned with what theoretically the company has identified itself as. And then select the best option based on the established criteria. So, it's a lot of work, yeah, absolutely. But when you're in a situation where you want to make the best possible decision without, missing any of the details, doing this in a very methodical way is going to ease any of that anxiety, theoretically anyway, that you may be feeling about making this choice. This little cartoon on the right, I love this. I've got a moral dilemma here. Mr. Zimmerman really needs sleep, but it's costing him $175 an hour. So clearly the guy's a psychotherapist. And, if you're treating someone for insomnia and they're asleep, you've kind of done your job, don't you? So moving on from an ethical dilemma, we're going to look at ethical decisions. And an ethical decision theoretically should be a much easier thought process because it's more of a right versus wrong. When one choice is right or legal and the other choice is wrong or illegal. When you make a decision that's unmistakably unethical or illegal, you've committed an ethical lapse. And depending on your own sense of ethics, you may be like boo-hoo, who cares? Other people may be, in fact, trying to live life according to a code of honor. So, for the folks who do want to live their lives according to a code of honor, you want to consider the following questions before you make decisions. First, is the action illegal? Is it unfair to any of the stakeholders? Fairness is different than somebody feeling like the company's not respecting them or the company's not supporting them. Fairness is saying, okay, all the people who are Catholic are going to get raises. Everybody who's not Catholic doesn't get a raise, which is of course ridiculous. But companies have done this where men will get 5% raises and women will get 3% raises, and it's completely unfair. But the people who make the decisions were all men, which is why it was so important for women to move into management. Will I feel badly if I do this? Would I be ashamed to tell the people I care about what I did? And would I be embarrassed if this information hit the media? Do you want to be the guy or the girl perp walked on the news while people are eating their Cheerios? It's not a good feeling. If your answer to any of these is yes, odds are that you're likely to do something you shouldn't. However, just keep in mind that you can always come back. You may not be able to get out of jail, but you will be able to lead an ethical life if you make that choice. So ethical decisions that are black and white, and that's it's okay, when we finally move in that ethical decision making. But there's a lot that no harm is being done to the stakeholders, but still we ask ourselves, is this going to be an ethical problem? So, and here are some very, very frequent ones. Is it okay to accept a pair of sports tickets from a supplier? Can I buy office supplies from my brother-in-law's company? If I find out that a friend is about to be fired, can I warn her? Will I have to lie about the quality of the goods I'm selling? Can I take personal emails and phone calls at work? And a lot of these things occur on a regular basis, and there are variables to consider. So, over here on the right, there's a cartoon. It's 40 years of service, and all I got to show for it is this cheap watch and $2 million in office supplies. One of the frequent things people joke about is how their pack of pens they stole from work, or they stole the Post-it notes from work. That kind of stuff that we don't consider even stealing. It just ends up in our bag, or we accidentally pick it up and we move on with our day and then realize later that we had put this pen in our pocket. Is it really stealing? Well, there are some ways of looking at this. First, we're going to look at the bribes versus gift. And it is very common in business to give and receive small gifts of appreciation. At Christmas time, you may get boxes of chocolates or fruit baskets from the people you do business with. The key issue in determining how a gesture should be interpreted include the cost of the item, the timing of the gift, the type of gift, the connection between the giver and the receiver. If you're on the receiving end, it's a good idea to refuse any item that is excessively generous or given for the purpose of influencing a decision. An employee comes in, they made cookies at Christmas, they give you a small tin of cookies. Is that going to influence your decision after that? I mean, especially if they're not that good. So, there's considered a general recognized status that if someone spends hundreds of dollars and hands you off tickets to a concert or something, that is a very sketchy proposition. Somebody comes in and they've made homemade brownies, that's not going to change your perspective on anything other than their ability to cook. Accepting even small gifts may violate company rules, so the best advice is to check your company's policy. Some companies don't have policies because they assume you'll do the right thing, but some companies are very specific and they'll say you cannot accept anything that would be worth more than $20 or $10. So we're talking very, very small amounts. So moving on to conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest occur when individuals must choose between taking or not taking actions that promote their personal interests over the interests of others. If you want to do business with a family member or friend, you should disclose the connection to your boss, who can then arrange things so that your personal interests don't conflict with the company's. Another issue that involves conflicts of interest is when you know information about your company that could benefit your personal financial situation. For example, if you know that the stock price is not hitting revenue targets, which will reduce its stock price, you should not dump your stock before the information is made public. Not only is it unethical, it is illegal, and this is called insider trading, and this is why Martha Stewart, the queen of catering, went to jail. She got a tip that one of her big investments was going to drop in stock price, and she sold the stock. I think she saved herself maybe 10 grand, but she ended up going to jail for 3 or 4 months, and it was really kind of a ridiculous situation. You don't see her as a dangerous criminal, but they wanted to make this point. Then there's the conflicts of loyalty, which is the one that we're most oftentimes dealing with. If you found out that your friend or coworker is going to be laid off, should you tell them? And despite our loyalty to our friend, because they are a coworker, we need to be loyal to our employer first. Even if we hate who we work for, we have what's called a fiduciary duty to the company. This means you have a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the company. So, when there is a fiduciary duty, that is when somebody is paying you. And if you look at your employee handbook or you look at your financial compensation contract, if you have one, there is going to be a fiduciary responsibility. And, that's the issue when you find out stuff that could impact somebody you're friendly with at work. Over here on the right, we've got a couple cartoons. Turns out fiduciary means you have to give it back. Yep, there is an inherent ethical obligation in those cases. And then below, this fiduciary thing really complicates pillaging a corporation. So again, a pretty excessive example, but nonetheless, you get the point. Honesty and integrity. Following laws and regulations is not enough for most companies. An honest employee displays a high level of unquestioned integrity by, number one, acting according to your own highest level of ethical beliefs. Number two, while at work, focus on your job, not on personal issues. And now the reality is that for many of us who get to work at 8 and oftentimes don't leave the office till well after 5 or 6, the only time we have during the day is while we're at work. And most employers understand that. And again, there are accommodations made by most employers, whether it is an official break, lunch, or just regular breaks, versus if you have a job that offers more flexibility and you can do this stuff. But you can't take advantage of it. Do not take home office supplies for your personal use. It's simple. You just shouldn't do it. You do it accidentally, you bring it back the next day. You're not a nerd. It just means that you have an understanding of boundaries. Be honest with all stakeholders, especially management and customers. Now, you need to learn what level of honesty is going to be accepted. Some employers, they don't want to hear from the people who work under them. And maybe this isn't the right environment for you to work. But, you have to measure your level of honesty against your own sense of ethics. Your character and reputation has been built over time, but one small infraction could ruin it. So, it's that woman who, for the entire year, she's been, very professional and respectable, and everybody looks at her with admiration, and then at the Christmas party, she gets really, really drunk and dances on a table while taking off her clothes. You can guarantee the next day at work, that's all anyone will want to talk about, because that is exactly the kind of stuff that can have long-lasting impacts on how people perceive you. Then there's whistleblowing, and this is when an individual exposes illegal or unethical behavior in an organization. So you work for a company, you find out that they're doing something that is extremely illegal, and you're in a situation where it's maybe not your job to go and report it, but you have discovered it and you have a duty to tell someone. In a way, it's like being in healthcare and in certain behavioral health careers, you have to report child abuse when you suspect it. And in some ways, it's the same concept, is you have to use your ethical boundaries to determine whether or not this behavior should be reported. The 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley Act protects whistleblowers under federal law. Doesn't mean, however, that whistleblowing doesn't come with career suicide. A survey of 200 whistleblowers conducted by the National Whistleblower Center found that half of them had been fired for blowing the whistle. Now, for example, some whistleblower activities may not be heard about because you're not necessarily reading the Financial Times or watching CNN Business kind of thing. Instead, this stuff happens when, for example, Enron is a big energy company, and an accountant saw that the accounting practices weren't making sense to her. She reported it. Nobody did anything. She sent more emails. She sent email after email to the board of the people who run the company. Nobody did anything. And when it was finally, the whistle was finally blown, she was the one who discovered the fraud, discovered that there was a massive fraud on employees going on, and revealed this. Now, she's had her life threatened. She's had her career oftentimes been undermined, and as a consequence to all of this, she suffered a great deal. But on the other side of the coin, she has also made people aware that they were buying stock from a company that was defrauding its employees, its customers, and its middle management. So let's talk about why people act unethically, because our unethical concepts, we think we're good people. Most people will describe themselves as a good person. And if you're not a good person, companies often provide a formal code of conduct that describes the principles and guidelines that all members must follow in the course of job-related activities. Despite attempts to ensure ethical behaviors, employees use 4 common rationalizations for justifying misconduct. My behavior isn't really illegal or immoral. My action is in everybody's best interest. No one will find out what I've done, and the company will condone my actions and protect me. So let's talk about one of the most common things that happens at work that drives people crazy. You bring your lunch to work. You put it in the employee refrigerator. At 12:30, you go to the fridge. Your lunch is no longer there. Somebody stole your lunch. Well, was the behavior illegal? No. Immoral? It depends on your moral barometer. Is the action in everybody's best interest? Well, nobody really cares but you. No one will ever find out what's been done, So again, if you've stolen that lunch and eaten it, who's going to figure it out? And the company will condone my action and protect me. If the company finds out I stole a lunch, they're not going to be firing me over it, right? Well, actually, people do, because it's indicative of a bigger issue. Now, over here on the right-hand side in the graphic, ethical behavior comes from 5 specific elements. How you make the decisions, which is why at the very beginning, when we talked about ethical dilemmas, we went through the process of decision making. Then the leadership. What does leadership provide? They should provide guidance and role models. If you have honest leaders, you tend to be honest employees. Then, if there are unrealistic performance expectations, this is when employees get really angry and want to get back at their company. If you're expected to do 150% of your job in less than 1 week, that's really, really hard. And as a consequence, you see people doing unethical things just to get back at their company. Organizational culture. In some sales environments, it's so cutthroat that the entire culture is toxic, and people are willing to do anything to get the sale. And then your own personal ethics. Some people have shaky ethical barometers. That's just, they didn't develop that ethical sense of what's right and wrong. Other people have an overly developed sense of right and wrong. They may be absolutely incensed that somebody took an extra 10 minutes for lunch on their birthday. Whereas, the average person would be like, cool, it was their birthday. So, moving on, we're going to touch on social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility is related to actions that affect a variety of parties in a company's environment. A socially responsible company shows concern for its stakeholders, i.e., anyone who, like owners, employees, customers, or the communities in which they do business, has a stake or interest in. What's right for one group of stakeholders isn't necessarily just as right for another. All stakeholders have some claim on the firm's resources and returns, and it's management's job to make decisions that balance these claims. So why does a company like Dunkin' Donuts or Wawa support and finance parades in the city of Philadelphia? Well, because they are literally the engine that gets most of us going in the morning with our coffee and our gas and our Wawa sandwiches. So they're doing what they believe will give them a good reputation in the community. The owners like to give back to their own individual stores and, see the boost in revenue. The customers appreciate all the special things that are done. And, overall, that kind of PR is invaluable. You get them on the news for 3 hours on Thanksgiving morning while they're doing a parade, and you see the Dunkin' Donuts or the Wawa icon in the corner for 3 straight hours. And if nothing else, we'll end up stopping there because you want coffee. Sexual harassment is part of that social responsibility, and it's become much more in the limelight in the last couple of years. There are 2 major types of sexual harassment that are addressed usually in the workplace. The first is quid pro quo, and this is when a person demands sexual activity in exchange for something such as keeping one's job. Harvey Weinstein, who was the chairman of Miramax and the Weinstein Company, a movie company, has been accused of basically trading movie roles for sex with young starlets. And you could say, hey, those girls walked into it knowing what they were up for. But apparently that's not how he couched it. It wasn't like, look, I'll give you this movie role if you have sex with me. It's, why don't you come and we'll do a reading, and then he would rape them. So it was a little less than by choice. But a lot of times, you'll have working at a company, and your boss will make it known that if you don't play ball, so to speak, you won't be getting a promotion. You won't be considered. And you won't lose your job, but you won't ever move up. And something like that, a lot of times people feel helpless and have no idea what other options they have. The second kind of sexual harassment is the one we see most often, and this is the verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And this can be anything from a dirty joke to a pattern of inappropriate comments, up to and including people who like to give hugs. You're not a troll. Stop hugging people. Get permission. It is very awkward when people who are huggers latch on to somebody who is not a hugger. And it may not be sexual, but it's inappropriate and can be perceived as sexual by the person who may not be enjoying the hug. So here are some interesting sexual harassment statistics. As I said, this has been a big topic over the last couple of years. In 2017, the CNBC survey looked at 800 professionals who were randomly sampled about this topic, and the findings demonstrated the pervasiveness of this issue. 27% of women report being sexually harassed. That is more than 1 in 4. 10% of men report being sexually harassed. Overall, almost 20% of people have been sexually harassed on the job. That is 1 in 5. So if there are 10 people in a room, that means at least 2 of them have been harassed. The good news is that younger employees report far less harassment than employees over the age of 35. And clearly, times they are a changin'. It's the Gen X and the baby boomer women who really endured a lot of this stuff because women didn't truly have the opportunity to join the workforce till the 1970s. By the 1980s, they had to join the workforce because you couldn't survive on one salary. And, consequently, women who graduated college and worked in the 80s and 90s dealt with a lot of sexual harassment. But the women who started the revolution in the 70s really dealt with an extraordinary amount of inappropriate behavior on the job. Based on the data from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Council, the number of complaints have dropped as more and more companies enact sexual harassment policies, which specifically explain what is and isn't acceptable. So again, if you don't know, look it up. And if it's not in the handbook, go talk to your HR rep. Find out. If you feel something's not right, it may not be right. Over here on the right, here is a guy, and he is saying, yes, and I feel it's my job to speak up, to support women too. And the lady sitting next to him is like, he's groping me under the table. Again, what we see here is this duality of, lip service versus what they're actually doing. So, employers have two major responsibilities when an employee reports sexual harassment. One, separate the individual from the person who they claim has sexually harassed them. Ensure that there is no further communication or personal interaction between them during the investigative part. And then you investigate the complaint thoroughly. You talk to everybody you can. You identify any issues. You have to deal with these things. Failure to enforce anti-harassment policies can be very expensive. In 1998, for example, Mitsubishi paid $34 million to more than 350 female employees of its plants in Illinois to settle a sexual harassment case. The EEOC proved that Mitsubishi allowed an atmosphere of verbal and physical abuse against women and female workers had been exposed to subjected to various forms of harassment, ranging from being exposed to obscene graffiti and vulgar jokes to fondling and groping. There is this thought process that you have to be able to take a joke. And if someone is making fun of your hair because you got a silly haircut, yeah, you can take a joke. But if somebody is referring to you as a piece of genitalia, for example, because they don't like the way you are doing your job, that is just inappropriate. So here are on the right the most common forms of workplace sexual harassment. 55% report sexually suggestive comments or jokes. And again, some people, they just are, want to make people laugh. They don't realize it's inappropriate until somebody says something. Other times, there's intrusive questions, and these are the ones that make you feel uncomfortable. So, do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? What do you do on Friday night? And, if there's some flirtation going on, and this is a person who's not your boss, it may be a different situation. But if it's your boss, that's really uncomfortable. 21% unwelcome physical contact. Neck rubs. There's this very famous picture of George W. Bush at an international conference, and he went over to Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany and the unofficial leader of the European Union, and started giving her a neck rub. And the look on her face is priceless because she's the leader of, the European Union in a sense. And this guy is, kind of groping her shoulders. So it was just really funny. And of course, this was 15 years ago, so it wasn't seen as inappropriate as much as silly. And then, of course, the inappropriate staring or leering, 31%, which I was just looking, Yeah, well, if you're saying and drooling, it's weird and gross. So here are some of the sources that were cited in this PowerPoint. If you have any questions, please feel free to text or email me. On the other hand, if you do not attend my class but would still like an answer to a question, please leave a comment and I will respond as soon as I can. Thank you. Have a fabulous day.